Okay. Good morning to all of you gathered here in studio in Vilnius and joining us virtually online. Sorry for a short delay in the start of our program. Vilnius is preparing for the NATO summit, so all roads are under the construction, which causes some traffic jams. My name is Rolandas Kačinskas, and I'm foreign policy advisor to the Speaker of the Lithuanian Parliament, and will be moderating and facilitating this discussion this morning in my personal capacity. Many thanks to the organizers of this roundtable for including me in the program. For those who miss it, it's a nice collaboration of the two institutions from two different countries representing different parts of the European regions. The Center for European Perspective from Slovenia and Infobalt from Lithuania. A couple of words about each of the institutions. The Center for European Perspective has been founded by the government of the Republic of Slovenia to assist the countries of the Western Balkans and other countries which share the European perspective in their efforts to join the European Union. Infobalt, on the other hand, is the Information and Communication Technology Industry Association from Lithuania, which aims to create the best conditions for the development and export of the ICT market. As you can see, these two institutions represent both the private and the public expert sectors, which shows that the theme of our conversation is interesting to groups across the board. In each crisis we face, whether the war against Ukraine or COVID-19, the rise of the authoritarian regimes, or the surge of energy prices, we find ourselves asking what that means for the US, for the European Union, for the Transatlantic Economic Leadership. So, in a nutshell, this is what we're going to converse about this morning. I hope, or maybe it's not the good word, I know that we'll have a very lively and interesting discussion because we have a very interesting and professional speakers at our panel today, real experts in their fields. So let me first introduce everyone on the panel as they appear in the program. And I will start from my good colleague, Jovita Neliupšienė, who is the Vice Foreign Minister of Lithuania. I must say that Jovita is very well suited for this topic, as she brings not only foreign policy and diplomatic perspective on the subject, but also has a good understanding of the economic issues at the level of the EU member states. As prior to becoming the Vice Foreign Minister, she was a Vice Minister for Economy and Investments in the current Lithuanian government. Moreover, Jovita will soon take over as the ambassador of the European Union to the United States. Amazing and well-deserved achievement, congratulations, but also I guess a very challenging one, because I guess one of the subjects that she will have to deal with in Washington will be how to bridge the gap between different approaches that exist between the United States and the European Union in many fields, including in the international economic fields, and now even more important as we move closer to the digital economy. Next panelist on the program is Marta Poslad, the head of public policy and government relations in Central and Eastern Europe at Google. Marta joined Google in 2012. Before assuming her current positions, she was responsible for privacy and security policy in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. She also analyzed impact of new technologies on societies and democracies on the academic front. It will be very interesting to hear your take on the topics of our discussion, as you represent one of the big tech companies that brings a digital economy to our daily lives. In addition, in the context of our discussion, the Google activities in the European Union will be a very good case study for us on the issues such as privacy, the market dominance that arise between the European Union and US on the digital economy front. Besides, your opinion will be very interesting because it's very timely, as we know that just 2 days ago the European Union regulator said that Google breached antitrust laws in the online advertising technology sector. So we also have with us today Fredrik Erixon, who is based in Stockholm, but today joins us from Gotland. He's Swedish economist and writer and director of the European Center for International Political Economy, an organization that he has been leading ever since its start in 2006. Now listen to this. The Financial Times has ranked Erixon as one of Brussels' 30 most influential people. This suggests that Fredrik is very well acquainted with the corridors of Brussels and will be able to share his insights on how the relationship with the US is viewed from the European Commission's and other EU institutions' sides. Fredrik's research interest covers international economic, European relations with Asia and North America, trade and regulatory policies, philosophy, and technological change. The last but not least on our list is Jaka Rapanšek, Chair of the Strategic Committee on Digital Regulations and Environment of the Lithuanian Digital Coalition. In his professional activities, he's focused on offering legal and business support to various so-called time companies, where T stands for telecom, I for internet, and two other letters for media and entertainment. So he will definitely have something to say about the differences in digital regulation between the US and the European Union from the expert's point of view, and what are the prospects for bridging the gap between different approaches that exist or might exist. Jaka joins us from beautiful Ljubljana, Slovenia. So, I've introduced the participants, and in doing so, I've also given an idea of what we're going to converse about. There will be time for questions, both from you, our virtual audience, but also from participants here in the studio, so get them ready for later on. Let me kick off our conversation with you, Mr. Erixon. And to do this, I would like to ask you to help us to deconstruct the topic of transatlantic economic leadership in the 21st century. What it meant by transatlantic community is quite clear, although even there can be two different approaches, a narrow one, that the relationship that exists between the European Union and the US, and another broader one that also brings into the discussion other countries' perspectives from UK, Canada, Norway, which would correspond more with the NATO's view on the transatlantic economy, but we could even take a broader approach that the transatlantic community also entails like-minded countries, even those that are located in the Indo-Pacific. But what puzzles me most is the concept of the economic leadership in the 21st century. Could you elaborate for us a framework for understanding what we mean by that, and what is it, and why the economic leadership might be different, leadership in 21st century might be different from the economic leadership in 19th century or 20th century. So, and why the transatlantic economic leadership matters? The floor is yours.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation to join you for the conference today. I'm sorry I can't be there on the spot, but I'm more than happy to join you online. Thanks also to all the participating organizations for what is sort of a very topical and interesting theme you have chosen as well for this conference. So, I mean, you all know that where we're coming from is a world economy, or a world where Europe and America they have represented sort of the vast, dominant majority of global economic output, global trade, new innovations, new technology, human capital creation in the world economy. I mean, basically ever since the Enlightenment, we've been in a process where sort of Europe has had a privileged position of being at the center of creating sort of a lot of the new knowledge and a lot of the technologies that have become dominating for how the economy is going to evolve, not just over decades, but over centuries. And ever since sort of the beginning of the rise of, especially in the first place, the East Asian economies in the 1960s and even more so from the 1980s and 1990s with new emerging economies. We've been on a path of relative economic decline for Europe and America, meaning that their share of the global economy or their share of new technology creation or new innovations have gradually declined for the simple reason that other parts of the world has begun to develop and become sort of more capable of generating the type of impulses that are going to determine sort of how the stream of the economy flows. And for the most part, I mean, that's very good news. It basically means that the world has become richer. It means that poverty has declined, and that sort of more parts of the world are now engaged in trying to come up with the type of products, services, ideas that are going to sort of generate new economic output and new prosperity in the future. So that's the sort of background, and that's sort of the context, I think, also for the conversation we're having right now. And it basically means sort of that for the transatlantic economy right now, if it wants to remain sort of a central vehicle for the global economy, and if it wants to use that economy for economic statecraft purposes, basically taking its own economic power and trying to generate different type of political outcomes in the world on the basis of that economic power, it now needs to begin to think deep and hard about how can it sort of resist the gravitation of the world economy, which is now going in a different direction. It's now sort of focusing more on the Asian economies and the Asia-Pacific region than it's on the transatlantic region. And I'm not so sure that there are sort of new things that we need to come up and talk about or try to sort of change in comparison with the 19th century or the 20th century. But I think there are a couple of things that we need to focus on very, very hard if we want to resist the gravitational pull of the world economy, which is going to sort of go in a different direction than especially Europe. First point would be having a strong economy, having an economy that generates good levels of economic growth. Neither Europe nor United States have had that for a pretty long time now. We are now becoming low growth economies, and low growth economies, even if we represent still a pretty significant share of the global economic output, it's rapidly declining, and it makes us less attractive places to go for investors, innovators, and of course we make us sort of less powerful in the world more generally. So faster growth, a strong economy, absolutely necessary. And as part of that also comes sort of being an economy and running economic policies which makes us capable of dealing with different type of problems that are going to occur. If you look, for instance, at the European economy now, I mean, we are sort of have many governments around Europe that are stretched for cash. We've been running public deficits for a long time. We have debt situations which are sort of increasingly problematic, not just for those who have been running very high debts for a long time, like sort of Greece and Italy and sort of the problems that we tried to deal with during the Eurozone crises. But we are really putting ourselves in a position where we are reducing our own economic freedom and our economic space to act because we simply don't have sustainable public finances. That comes into play here. But perhaps more importantly now, in terms of thinking about these issues, I think it's very much about technology generation, about generating the technologies, the innovations, the entrepreneurship, the human capital, the ideas that are going to sort of be the dominating part of the 21st century. And here, what we can see is, of course, the competition is much harder now than it was 20 years ago, let alone 50 years ago. America is still in a pretty good position in terms of technology creation and generating innovations that are becoming central for the way the world economy works. There are sort of bits and pieces, sectors and markets in Europe where we are pretty good at it as well. But generally, Europe is falling behind the frontier of technological change in the global economy. And I think that undermines our own capacities to use our economy for sort of good, constructive economic statecraft. Europe doesn't become sort of this attractive place that it used to be for investors or companies that want to develop products and that want to sort of generate the type of output that is going to sort of dominate, if not the economy today, so in 5 years' time. And I think here for Europe, it becomes increasingly important to find its ways forward in order to sort of get to a position where it's much more of a global technology leader again. And then I think that includes continuing to tie itself closer to the American economy, not sort of being a junior partnership in a transatlantic firm, but sort of being also an economy that can generate and contribute to that partnership in a more constructive way than we've done recently. I think we need to become sort of much more careful with how we design our policies in a way that we sort of strengthen these strategic economic partnerships that we have and not sort of go to a position where through industrial policy or trade policy where we're sort of acting in a way which is sort of a bit of sort of economic nationalism. And while there may be sort of a few things here that are motivated to do, we shouldn't sort of confuse our policies to think that we have problems with all countries in the world. What we need to do sort of is to find strategic partnerships and go ahead with more constructive and deeper collaboration with these economies. And of course, the United States is going to be the first and foremost of these economies. And then sort of what we need to do in order to produce more resilience and to have a better sort of strategic control over how our economy works. That will have to come with other policies that needs to become specific to those countries that we have problems with. So what I would like to see is sort of much more of a transatlantication and a much greater understanding on the part of Europe that we need to deepen collaboration with America. And in order to do so, we need to be prepared to make a couple of trade-offs. There is a lot of things that America also needs to do. And I think there is sort of on the part of America, what I really would like to see there, an avoidance of going deeper into sort of this pit of economic nationalism and populism, and that it sort of gets to the point where it begins to develop an idea for how America is going to lead globally on many of these issues in the future. If it has problems with the type of forms and institutions that we used to have in the past in order to deal with global economic leadership and global economic cooperation, well, then it's the responsibility of America to come up with better ideas for how we're going to have this form of collaboration today, given the type of strategic threats that we find politically, militarily in the economy. So there is a lot of things that America needs to do as well for this to work out. But I think both sides need to have a much greater understanding that if Europe and the United States aren't going to begin to collaborate a lot deeper than it's done over the past 10, 20 years, then it's going to find it extraordinarily difficult to have influence on the way the global economy is going to develop. We're going to become more hostage to fortune and more hostage to the decisions that are going to be made elsewhere in Beijing or in other parts of the world where economic power has increased substantially.
Okay, thank you. We'll come back to this. Now I would like to bring Jovita into the discussion. And you, Mr. Erixon, mentioned mainly the economic factors which determine the transatlantic economic leadership. But I would like to ask Jovita to bring her, as I said, a foreign policy and diplomatic perspective, to ask whether we can decouple economic leadership from the political leadership, and what does Russia's war against Ukraine tell us about the status of the international system that we find ourselves in at the moment, and what it tells about the international economy as well.
Thank you very much, and thanks for inviting, and thanks for the question. It was really interesting to listen to Mr. Erixon. But yes, indeed, we're living in times of geopolitical crisis. We The Russian aggression happened just right after the COVID, which has had a huge, actually, influence on our global economies, on supply chains, on distribution of raw materials, and so on and so forth. So it is very difficult, actually, to say that there is a very clear line between economy and foreign relations or security policies. One aspect which I do believe is extremely important is actually that the trust in general in transatlantic relations and their need to develop transatlantic relations is much more higher than it was in the pre-COVID times. There are different reasons for that, but. There were political reasons, of course, but there were very pragmatic economic reasons. During COVID, we saw really a collapse of some of the supply chains. We saw the reaction of some of the players on the global market. We actually managed to determine huge dependencies of our economies. It doesn't really very much matter on which side of the Atlantic we have been. There was a very clear dependency on some of the critical raw materials, on some technologies, on some of the logistic ways, and I think, and then on top of that, we actually have Russian aggression in Ukraine, and these circumstances brought back on track, if I may put like that, transatlantic cooperation. If I would have to take last 20 or 25 years, I would say that right now we have really the peak of cooperation of transatlantic relations. I would wish we would managed to get our trade agreement at a certain point, but it didn't happen. So right now we have a Trade and Technology Council, which operates on the highest level. We have numerous working groups where you bring not only technology or economic experts, but in general across the board experts working together. And I do believe that there is what actually creates maybe not unity, but commonness in the transatlantic relations right now is that the understanding that, be it economic field or be it political field, we are facing the challenges from non-democratic or authoritarian states, which actually on one hand, they really are not keen to apply international rules, be it economic, trade rules, or be it, and they are not really very much keen on abiding their international borders. So we are speaking as well in the political realm. We are facing challenges which we can actually respond only together. And there, of course, I can agree with you that because when we are mentioning and saying the transatlantic leadership, so we probably have, of course, in the very strict terms, it's about EU-US cooperation, but in the broader term, I would guess that we have to talk about more like-minded group of countries. And we have to rely on each other because otherwise the review of the current status quo in the global relations, this is one thing. Another thing, we have to rely on each other because this questioning of what kind of the rules we have for our trade relations is becoming more challenging. And we can, of course, believe that this is only theoretical and we can stick to very neoliberal approaches, saying that, trading will always bring countries together. And, well, it's so not true. And I think The Russia's aggression in Ukraine showed that you can trade billion of euros or billion of dollars with the country. It can still go to the conventional war. You can trade hundreds of billion with the country, and the country can still nationalize or put a pressure on bigger players like Nokia or Ericsson. Right. So we're really facing the challenges, and the challenges can be faced together.
Thank you, Jovita. You raised the question of the supply chain resilience, and this issue is at the forefront of the discourse and thinking on both sides of Atlantics very much. And we deal with this, in addition to the strains on the commodities following the Russia's aggression on Ukraine, there are also pre-existing systematic problems when it comes to the supply, like technology components, raw instruments. So my question would be, what are some measures that the European Union and the United States could bring to enhance the resilience of the supply chain for both the short and long term, in the short and long term run, and how to avoid that from running from the wolf, we wouldn't jump on the bear, as we know the European Union is moving from the carbon dioxide dominant economy to the green economy. So how to make sure that we wouldn't create the new dependencies?
I think you would be probably surprised, but we are not far away with our views how to tackle first and the most the lesson probably from COVID and from Russia's aggression, dependencies. I think this is really actually the problem which we have to face on both sides of the Atlantics. We have to avoid raw material dependencies. We saw what happened actually with gas and oil. But we have as well to avoid technological dependencies, and what can actually happen quite easily. If you ask me if EU and US, I know more about EU, of course. Back in 2012, we have so-called solar war with China, which was, of course, not war, it was the trade competition. At that moment, EU enacted the anti-dumping measures for the photovoltaic panels or solar panels on China. There was a possibility actually to extend them, and there was a vote in the EU, and it's a qualified majority vote. So we voted not to extend. What happened? There was only really one handful companies which survived Chinese pressure with all the dumping measures they apply. Well, thanks God, one of them was in Lithuania. Well, still is in Lithuania. Some others are mostly in Germany. What we have right now, 75% of solar panels are produced in China. They have a share of the global market. So, and we can go, you can say that in 2012, we haven't thought that it is a critical infrastructure, critical production, or critical dependencies. Well, but that's why we need to have smart people in the leadership to foresee that, the greening will be still happening, renewables will be still needed, and we shouldn't be so much dependent on going back on the raw materials from Russia. So we haven't foreseen that actually this can. So I really very much believe that there are several sectors where we have to work together on both sides of the Atlantics, be it, of course, chips and semiconductor area, microelectronics, if you wish. So this is one. Another is, of course, AI and everything what is related to that sector, and probably supercomputing or whatever in the broader sense, whatever it's include, because I think that in the future dependencies on those two sectors could actually unravel our economies. And EU of course has the trade defense tools. We are looking into the anti-coercion, to make sure that the authoritarian countries would not really use economic measures against us. And we have the possibility to react to that. So the instrument is almost ready. Hopefully, it will be fixed. Next week, Commission will come up with the economic security strategy, which will will set probably the framework for how we have to ensure that we have a more resilient investment environment. We are sure where our own money is going, so outbound investments, and on which partnerships we have to build. And I'm sure the Transatlantic will be at the center of that.
Okay, thank you. So it seems that at least in some sectors, we already jumped on the dragon while running from a beer. Mr. Erixon, anything to add from your side on the question of the supply chain resilience and how to shorten it, or even focusing on the domestic economies? Would that help?
So, I mean, I think there are many different issues that we can approach when we talk about not just supply chain resilience, but sort of resilience in a broader economic sense as well. I mean, the experience that we have had over the past couple of years during COVID and the consequences of the war now, looking at it sort of more of a structural, from a structural perspective, I think we can also identify a couple of particular goods that we need to sort of find specific policies for. So, and we just heard sort of a pretty good sort of description of where we can find these sort of strategic vulnerabilities, so to speak. They're going to be very much in the field of energy and critical raw materials. And here, I mean, I think it's sort of having a much better strategic orientation in the way that we think about these issues is absolutely necessary. I mean, many of us have been calling for that for a long time, including, of course, for decisions made in different European countries about relying on energy supply for countries who we could say very obviously have intentions towards European countries and European neighbors that aren't friendly, that ultimately is going to lead to conflicts. And unfortunately, many governments in Europe didn't listen to that particular warning when it started to emerge in the beginning of the 2000s. What I would like to sort of come back to, and what I would like to put the emphasis on, however, is going to be on sort of having a strong economy. It's all fine to speak about resilience, shortening supply chains, strategic autonomy, and all that, but nothing of it means anything if we don't have a strong economy. If we don't have an economy that generates the knowledge, the technologies, the innovation, the human capital, the ideas that are important in the future. We can talk about sort of, finding a policy here or a policy there that are going to reduce specific vulnerabilities that we have vis-a-vis China or that we have vis-a-vis other countries. But, it's not going to take us very far unless we have much more investment and much more focus in Europe on generating these underlying capacities. We need to have universities that are going to be in the world class if we're going to compete in AR, compete in the frontier technological change in biomedicine or in energy technology. It doesn't just suffice with the type of development that we've had over the past couple of decades, where we've become complacent about the fact that we are sort of dropping in university rankings. The environment for doing research and experimental product developments in Europe have gradually declined because we are sort of don't have the resources to spend on it, or because we are going ahead with regulatory policies that are choking the type of innovation and experimental development that we need to see. And here, I really don't find that the sort of the crisis awareness or the strategic awareness is good enough right now in Europe. That we need to make us much more attractive places also for those in other parts the world that want to do these things, because this is not just something that Europe can do alone. It costs too much to sort of develop capabilities to be on the frontier of many of these things. We need to have strategic collaborations. We need to make ourselves attractive for those who have resources and talents to come to Europe and develop these capacities and develop these technologies here. And if we don't do that, I'm afraid, it doesn't matter what we're going to do on trade policy or on strategic policies in terms of reducing the vulnerabilities that we have in our supply chains, because ultimately we're going to be dependent on the type of knowledge and the type of technology that is being generated elsewhere. And then our dependency is going to increase even more. So if we are really serious about these issues, all the stuff that we just talked about in terms of anti-coercion, in terms of economic strategies coming from Brussels, they're all fine. But still, these are just drop in the oceans compared to what needs to happen in terms of broad investments, much better business innovation and entrepreneurship climates, because if that does not come along, nothing much is going to change, I'm afraid.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the strong economy, and more specifically about the strong digital economy. And I will ask Jaka Repanšek to start, and Marta Poslad to follow with the insights. And I would like, Eric, maybe you could draw for us the picture how the digital economy looks like, and where the US and EU stands in this picture. Eric? Jaka, can you hear us?
Would you like me to start with the answer first?
Yes,
Marta
please.
will start. Okay, that's a very good question, and thank you again for inviting me also, and sunny hello from Ljubljana, online and live listening to us. I'll be very practical with your questions. We're actually, the way we see it, we are engaged in a level playing field competition between the US and EU, and we're sort of forgetting about the rest of the world and the consequences that will have to our competitiveness. I think if I would just point out a few most important things that we see in the regulatory field, first of all, we really need, and we're crying for, a new privacy shield. Now, that's a very technical question. I don't know how much you're aware of that, but right now there is a very strong lack of possibilities for real cooperation when it comes to digital economy, for a very simple reason. For example, one of them is a lack of a new privacy shield between EU and the US, which regulates the data exports from EU to American companies. European Union will need to become more competitive. I would like to follow what Fredrik said before. It seems like a lot of times we're just over-regulating. So we are dealing with new regulation in the EU, while we're forgetting that will not just fill the gap of 20 years of lacking behind technological and economic development in the field of digital economy. So we really need to focus on how to become more competitive and not just think about how to over-regulate. So it's not regulation, it's smart regulation that we are looking for to become more competitive in the European Union. And one last point that will change everything, of course, is the artificial intelligence. I'm sure we will address that issue later on, because that will also be a big game changer when it comes to digital economies that we can't even foresee what will happen in the next 3, 4, 5, or even 10 years from now. So briefly, that would be from my side, and of course I'll follow up later on with some other questions.
Marta, so how do you see the picture of the digital economy? Is the future already here, and why the European Union is lagging behind the US, let's say?
So I think the future has been around for a very long time, and as Vice Minister said, even decisions considering 2012 turn out to have very long-term consequences for what we would call today a modern economy. So I think the focus of the first 45 minutes of our discussion was very much on shortages, shortcomings, much need for investment, education, and I think, we could essentially conclude every panel and with that, and I think education is usually number one. When you can't find a consensus to respond to something, you say, well, it's a long-term education that is required, and of course everyone in this room would agree to that. If we went and survey on the street, people would say 100% correct. The problem is that we're at a point when we should be, of course, making those investments and make sure that that debate repeated in 15, 20 years will turn out different results. But I think there are issues on the horizon that need to be resolved today, and where we do not have time to wait for the outcomes of doing things ourselves. So two processes in parallel, where yes, there should be long-term strategies, investments, and planning, but at the same time, we need to look at the tools that we have today. And in Europe, I feel that there is a limit of cards we can play, but certainly there is the transatlantic ally, and there are many mutual advantages that could be leveraged. And it's all about the tone and the strategy and an approach. And I would say that in the EU, there is no one approach. I think we often like to say EU this, EU that, but when you think about approaches to technology and perspectives on what technological leadership should look like, there are different approaches. So on the one end of the scale, you'll find a narrative on strategic autonomy. So, a concept that would side with that need for the investment and calling for more education. Somewhere probably in the middle is a concept of open strategic autonomy, which I think, balances the two parallel streams that I talked about in the best way. So, like, we do agree Europeans do want to own their tools that create digital economy, for example, but at the same time are open in leveraging different tools. And in terms of lagging behind, again, this is not an easy equation to make, and I think everyone can make their own judgment looking at, for example, 6 months back, what is the origin of companies or projects that emerge in the big AI discussion that has been in the tech world for a very long time. It has just become very mainstream since OpenAI came out with ChatGPT, and that's definitely a field that would suggest Europeans should look at transatlantic US partners in what they can bring in and what Europe has to offer. And one thing that Europe certainly succeeded in is making approach to technology more responsible, looking at regulation certainly in a different way. And as Fredrik gave examples of what happens when that approach is abused or taken too far. So from where I sit, I think first we thought it was COVID where technology proved to be a lifeline for carrying on many areas of social life. And, numbers shows that the more digital economies were, the more resilient they were throughout the crisis. And especially for us sitting here in this part of the world, the war in Ukraine showed even more so what is the significance of digital economy. In good times of peace, we can talk about e-commerce, building startups, and the war in Ukraine showed that digital economy is a much broader ecosystem. It stretches from online shopping to defense sector, to cybersecurity sector, that I think shed a new light for Central and Eastern Europeans, and definitely also for US companies operating in this part of the world. And if anyone was lacking a reason to believe why digital economy matters, I think that was definitely it.
Okay, thank you. Let's focus a little bit more. Let's go back to this strong digital economy. I meant to ask all panelists, how does the digital economy looks like of the respective home countries? We don't have much time to ask for all of you, but we'll ask maybe representatives of two smallest countries, from Lithuania and Slovenia, how the home digital economy looks like, and whether smaller countries have a meaningful role and possibilities to become important players on the global scale. Yes, please, Jovita.
I think that for us, whenever I was doing the investment promotion, I would start, we are in the top 10 or the number 2 globally in cybersecurity. We are number 11 in fintech. We have 2 unicorns, both of them are because of the digital. One is cybersecurity, another is e-commerce, sustainable e-commerce, by the way. Whenever you go out to the EU institutions and you ask, so what is Lithuania about? They would say, they have one question, they always had one question, this is Russia. How Russia is related to digital, how they see that. Well, Lithuania is about disinformation or fighting disinformation. So once again, is very digital. If you go down to the really, the common people, the us, how we use. So we are in the leading position on their e-shopping and spending e-money on online, per capita, not per capita. So I think that we very much benefit. And I would not talk about the penetration of the broadband and so on and so forth. Faster internet and so on, so far. I think Marta even can better say about Lithuania from her perspective. But I think for us, e-economy or digital economy was always the thing we wanted to cling. We saw the opportunities, and we still see huge opportunities in here. But as Mr. Erixon was saying, it's about having economic growth and a strong economy. So everything. Well, one is the trade and services and the digital. Another is to make sure they have really hardcore industry to make this digital work. So I think that our strength as well lies in some of the companies' endeavors to play part in the field of semiconductors as well.
Jaka, is Slovenia as good in digital economy as it is in basketball?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a small country. There's no other way than become a really developed digital economy. I mean, we're never going to be competitive in large industries or attracting really large investments in production as we can in digital. And that's where we can be competitive compared to bigger countries. So digital is the future, and the focus, I would say, also last governments we have. We have gained 3 positions on the DESI index, which measures development of the digital sector in member states of the European Union. We're number 13 now, which is absolutely not where we want to be in the long run. But it's gradually improving. The main focus we have put on strategy, which was just adopted by the government, it's called Digital Slovenia 2030, is artificial intelligence. Even 50 years ago, Slovenian researchers were among the pioneers in the artificial intelligence development. 20 years ago also. Today, we are also trying and aiming to focus on artificial intelligence as the backbone of our digital economy. But we are, of course, facing the same problems as similar-sized countries are in the European Union. First of all, are we competitive? Are we competitive tax-wise? Are we competitive labor-wise? Can we attract talents to a small country like Sweden will help us develop the backbone of our digital economy. That is the main task or the main challenges we see foreseeing our growth in the digital sector. And another thing I want to point out, and I pointed it out before, is the regulation. Look, 80% of our economy, and I think that's similar in Baltic states or in some similar size states as member states of Slovenia, are small and medium-sized enterprises who are heavily dependent on technologies which are mostly from the United States. And we're not going to fill the gap of 20 years, but just by over-regulating some things and saying, okay, now we're going to punish every American company which is using private data. We don't have a privacy shield, etc. So 80% of our economy depends on American technology at the moment. And we have very big uncertainty in the field of regulation, in the field of data flows, in the field of many other regulatory acts that are being prepared by the European Union, which are great. And I'm proud to say the European Union is the pioneer of regulation on the global scale. But I can also see practical consequences when it comes to competitiveness of a digital economy such as Slovenia and comparable small countries. So we need to address the issue of harmonization of American and European, at least basic digital in the short run, in the medium run. Otherwise, we're going to be in this constant conflict and uncertainty when it comes to companies working in the global field of digital economy. So that's a short report from Slovenia on that point.
Thank you. So let's move back to our main topic, which is transatlantic economic leadership. And so from what we understood is that the transatlantic relationship is not only contextual phenomena, but also relational phenomena. We need to cross boundaries that might exist or exist between two entities. So how does the need for the engagement with the US on economic matters look from the EU perspective?
The answer is good.
Do you think there's a strong political will within Brussels to forge the strong transatlantic relationship with the US?
I think, as I said, I think that right now it's stronger than ever. And there is a very clear understanding, especially in the European Commission, and I would say even among member states, because I remember totally different times. I would not wish to dwell on that, but I think that those who have been involved in the foreign relations or in following EU-US relations, we have been in totally different situations even 20 years ago. I think what is extremely important is, unless we don't have the trade agreement, to bring our positions on, even we cannot ally our policies, we have to bring our positions and trade policies, technology policies, views on raw materials, views on on resilience, if you wish, in the broader sense, as close as possible. Because this would actually help what the economist and Mr. Erixon is saying, how to build, to make sure that our economies are not only the slow grow economy. And one of the things which probably the digital for the transatlantic digital economy can help for the transatlantic relation is actually opening data. Because it will be a data economy as well, setting the rules for that, and setting quite similar rules for that on both sides of the Atlantic, and building on that. But it's maybe your field of expertise.
Mr. Erixon, what do you think with this new geopolitical and geoeconomic environment factors at play? Perhaps there's a possibility of reviving the TTIP, the Transatlantic Partnership and Trade and Investment Partnership Agreement, or at least the lighter version of it, or if not, if this new instrument called the EU-US Trade and Technology Council is sufficient instrument, knowing that it's non-binding one.
So, I mean, to start with, and to follow also all from where sort of the minister talked and said, so there has been ups and downs in transatlantic economic cooperation, and I think we need to realize sort of that the period of the Trump administration in America had sort of very strong effect on generating a lot of distrust, especially from Europe vis-a-vis America, but also a little bit from United States to Europe. And over the past years, there's been sort of an attempt to try to reestablish different type of mechanisms to get back to just normal economic diplomatic relations. The war and the consequence of the war, I think, gave an electric shock to the demand to the need for transatlantic economic cooperation. And the question now, I think, is the extent to which that we can actually create something which reflects that need and reflects the growing demands for it that exist. And I think the jury is still out if the two sides actually are going to be capable of doing it. Right now, we are still in a process of pretty strong divergence between United States and Europe on key policies. I mean, we mentioned, Jaka mentioned, Marta, Jovita mentioned sort of digital regulations that are coming. And on these digital regulations, there is divergence between Europe and United States. But if we go outside the digital field and begin to look at other things like, for instance, how we deal with climate change, the consequences of climate change policies for trade and how we are incorporating these type of policies in trade right now, we also see that there is sort of a lot of divergence there. In Europe, we became a bit occupied with the Inflation Reduction Act in America, when during the autumn it started to show that some of the consequences of the IRA would be discrimination of European products. Vice versa, America is occupied with the fact that Europe is going ahead with the so-called Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM, which has been decided, which is going to lead to discrimination also of American primary products that are coming into Europe. And these are just sort of a handful of examples of different policies that are being taken right now that leads to more divergence. The Transatlantic Trade and Technology Council met in northern Sweden just a couple of weeks ago, and I think there were a couple of sort of positive decisions that came out of it. But for me, observing that meeting, talking to people there and sort of observing the trends of these TTC collaboration over the past year, I just think it's woefully inadequate given the scale of the challenges and the importance of deepening transatlantic economic cooperation now. And I would certainly hope to see a much growing awareness in Europe that if we want to continue along the trend of divergence, it's going to have strategic economic consequences for us. It's going to reduce our capability to generate economic growth, but it's also going to have consequences for us in how we try to use our own economic power in the rest of the world. And of course, it's the same thing for America. I mean, sort of the more that they are going in a different direction and distancing themselves from Europe, it's also going to reduce their capabilities to represent themselves in the world and try to achieve the type of outcomes that they want to achieve. And sort of before we then can start to think about what the other institutions and mechanisms could be, we need to have much, much, much stronger awareness about the need for it before we can start to figure out exactly what the forms for it is going to be. If it's going to be sort of a new form of ECIPE, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, if it's other forms of initiatives that needs to be taken. But before we get there, we need to be capable to use TTC to build trust, to build stronger awareness about the need for collaboration, and start to see a couple of more outcomes that we've seen so far. it's still sort of friction over minor points that dominate many of these conversations that take place, which relates to sort of forward-looking issues like regulatory cooperation on different type of issues. It's a narcissism of small difference, which has been the dominating sentiment of this format so far, and we need to move out from that.
Okay, so one of the successes that TTC is being attributed to, it's attributed to the work of the TTC is the sanctions on the technology exports from EU and US imposed on Russia and Belarus. I understand that then this decision was also joined by some other like-minded countries. But Jaka, a question would be for you, because it's also a question of the regulatory nature. Do you think that we can build on this success to achieve a common approach to other challenges, let's say having a more common, more coherent position on China? Hello?
I'm sorry,
Can you hear me, Jaka?
Is this question for me or?
Yes, for you.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question again? I didn't hear it very well, I'm sorry.
As I said, one of the successes that is attributed to the work of the TTC is the EU and USA technology export controls against Russia and Belarus. And do you think that we can build on this success to achieve a common approach on other challenges, let's say related to China?
Well, that's a hard question to say. I'll let somebody else. Maybe we'll have a more comprehensive answer to that question. Maybe Fredrik, you can do that.
Okay, Jovita, maybe you.
Always the difficult question for the government representatives. Yes, I think in general the dialogue always helps to build on one another success. As I mentioned, I think that success will come if we will identify on the both sides of the Atlantic which are the biggest challenges, and if the biggest challenge at the moment is a control of technologies or technology export, and we can agree in which field this is the most critical issue, I think this is where you can start building if not the consensus, so really a very close understanding. It can, I am not sure if we should dwell right now on this de-risking and decoupling discussion which we have in Europe and in US. But my gut feeling would say that if I listen very carefully what internal debate in US is and what kind of the internal debate we have among the member states, I can say that we are not so far away. I would wish we would be closer. Well, but right now I'm still representing the member states, which probably is closest on the stance on China with US. But nonetheless, in general, the understanding of the challenges which are posed by authoritarian countries is getting more obvious. And of course, the biggest challenge for you is really dependencies in one or another sectors, which we have to diminish.
Okay, it seems that one of the problem with the transatlantic economic leadership is that disagreements always overshadows the achievements and the successes that the transatlantic cooperation has. Recently, the Buy America provisions in the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act being met critically in Brussels. On other hand, the U.S. administration or U.S. big tech companies dissatisfied with the EU regulatory regimes when it comes to the privacy, data flow, antitrust laws. So the question, Marta, it would be for you, how you see this situation, and especially maybe you could comment on this recent decision of the European Union regarding that Google breached the antitrust laws. So, you put us from the practitioner's position, how it affects the company's activities in the European Union.
Yes, and I think you started this question right with the right observation. There are no two other regions in the world that are as digitally connected as Europe and the US. 75% of content that is generally produced is produced on one of the sides of the Atlantic. The number of jobs mutually created in the digital industry is also very significant. And we don't talk about this too often. Indeed, we focus on problems. Before I get to this particular statement of objectives, you did say that U.S. tech players often complain about the regulatory regime, and I would say these complaints come from two different sources. I think there is often a sense that U.S. tech companies are particularly targeted by the European regulation, and that's something that worries us most. I think over especially, say, 5 past years, tech companies have been saying, deregulate us. And there has been a number of sets of regulations, both in the US and in the EU, where we were absolutely constructive partners, actually asking for the regulator to show the direction of travel, but that's not always the case. And I think the complaint is not anymore as that could have been over a decade ago when Silicon Valley companies came to Europe and essentially said no, thank you, no regulation. We're not in that sphere anymore. I think the complaint, the so-called complaint, comes from how does the European regulation set up overall European digital ecosystem for success, and not only US tech companies' success in Europe, but all the unicorns and startups and also big enterprises that are trying to become digital, because let's not forget that digital economy is not only the companies that are probably coming to this beautiful building, but also large companies that are redefining themselves in the era of cloud computing, quantum computing, AI, and so on. And I think looking at the next European election and what happens after, how the new strategy is going to be defined, what will be the new agenda, this should be top of mind. How to create an ecosystem starting from education, investment, through regulation that will keep Europe on the pro-growth agenda path, including through digital technologies. And we see more and more and hear more and more voices from European enterprises. Business Europe ran a super interesting research that was published about two months ago, and we're back to the good old language of cut the red tape that is coming from European businesses. And I think that should be something we should be thinking of and very constructively setting the agenda to make sure that it's on the positive side, on the pro side, and not anti-side. And to your question on the statement of objectives, it's very fresh, and so it's hard for me to provide a very substantial comment except for two things. First of all, we offer solutions that were taken into account of that statement to help publishers and developers monetize the tech work they're creating and exposing to the public. And we disagree with the approach the Commission has taken, and will do whatever is necessary to prove our point of view. This is not a new case. This is something that has been discussed for a long time, and we just hope we can prove that the model that we're operating around does not meet the threshold that the Commission is worried about.
Jaka, anything to add on the regulatory issue?
Yeah,
How
I
to
mean,
bridge the gap, you know?
So on the regulatory approach, I may add something. I mean, it's a very noble aim, as I mentioned before, that European Union is the global regulator when it comes to many fields that are important for digital economy. I'm not sure, however, that the rest of the world is always eager to follow in our footsteps. So that is an issue we need to understand when we regulate specific fields that eventually become a global regulatory issue, such as GDPR, for example. We have one global digital market. We have to understand that. There are no boundaries here. But when it comes to the US and the EU, I don't think the fundamental values when it comes to digital regulation are very far apart. I think there are some technical issues that must be resolved. And for example, again, I'll come back to the data flow, must be resolved immediately because they're blocking competitiveness on both sides of the Atlantic. I also would like to emphasize that we don't put enough emphasis on the economic consequences of regulation that we adopt in the European Union enough. Sometimes it seems that following a noble goal is more important than thinking about all the aspects of the economical and competitiveness, the consequence. For example, I'll just throw one of those things that are happening right now, the telco tax in the European Union. I mean, even though for some it may be a very practical or noble idea to do that, but the consequences regarding net neutrality, regarding many other issues are so important. And when you look at the draft ideas, the draft proposals of legislation, you actually sometimes really lack this economic analysis of the consequences that regulation will have. But we will need to, and I will conclude with this, we will need to work more on unifying or harmonizing the digital regulation on both sides of the Atlantic as much as possible. That is the backbone of everything relating to our development in the future.
Thank you. The last question before we move to the Q&A session is about something that your Vice Foreign Minister mentioned about the EU strategic autonomy. How should we view the EU strategic autonomy in the light of the topic of our discussion, Transatlantic Economic Leadership, and if the EU strategic autonomy is the right response to EU's political, technological, and industrial ambitions?
First of all, it's of course open strategic autonomy, as Marta mentioned, and the idea was actually to balance. And I think there are probably three major things: protect, promote, and partnerships. So protect, you know, we spoke quite a lot about the resilience, and we experience really the challenging of existing international rules in different areas. We have the questions of ensuring the rights of consumers. So all those have to be, you know, taken care of. Of course, the promote. I think that one of the important things is EU always strive for broader trade relations, broader economic perspective. You know, the thing maybe is that we are still not at the path to make sure that we really investing as much as possible to ensure that we really actually are growing faster than we do at the moment, and hopefully we will manage to get there when, especially the Russian aggression in Ukraine will be over. And last but not least is about the partnership. You cannot have any open strategic autonomy, or you cannot be open and strategic if you don't have partners. And I do believe that there are the partners in the whole world, and the Transatlantic Partnership is one of those, and not only one of those, but really the most important one to have. And there are lots of different kind of indication on the jobs created, investments, mutual investments, the investments in innovations and so on and so forth. So this is one thing. Another thing is, of course, to build partnerships with all the like-minded countries and non-authoritarian regimes. So, we can actually have, the colleagues mentioned as well, a level playing field on one hand. On the other hand, we have really a healthy, competitive environment in our areas together with our partners, with like-minded countries.
Mr. Erixon, would you like to add anything on the matter of the EU strategic autonomy?
So can you just repeat that, Rolandas? Did you ask about on strategic autonomy?
Yeah, how does the ambitions of EU to have the strategic autonomy looks in the light also, when it comes to our topic of this discussion, transatlantic economic leadership, whether there is no disagreements in the wish for the strategic autonomy on one hand, on the other hand, to seek for the stronger transatlantic partnership.
I'm afraid, Rolandas, I'm not hearing you well at all.
Okay, so let's leave it here for a moment, and I would like to open the floor for questions then to our panelists. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Tine from Center for European Perspective. We've heard a lot about the general state of mind. So it's not ideal how Europe is positioned. We see some regulatory divergence, but I would like to go more to the positives. So I would like to hear from the panelists. What do they think is maybe overly simplistic? One thing that Europe needs to do right now to be more competitive or to be a better partner to the US for the future, because as we've heard, we need to be better in order to be able to influence matters of the world in the future. So one thing may be oversimplistic, but still, thank you.
Can I
Yes,
abuse
please.
the fact that I lend the microphone? Great question. I would say let's look at both Europe and the US. And in very general, I'm going to give you two answers. One very general, one concrete proposal. One very general would be arrive at a unified transatlantic vision for how to jointly develop technological, responsible leadership globally, and let's agree on that. Let's have that principle. Let's work on that. Let's commit to it between Europe and the US. Very practically, I would say AI is a fantastic test case. Something, there are many technologies when someone was late to the party, EU regulated, US didn't, or the other way around. AI is a fantastic example, and I think that's something that actually stood out of the recent TTC meeting, where that mindset could be tested. And I think no other topic nor other technology is as vital and as important to approach it jointly versus other global players.
It's very difficult to disagree. I would add that we actually, as EU, but partially as US as well, we have to boost investments in innovation. That would be, it's on one hand, it's very general answer. On the other hand, I can be more precise, venture capital in Europe.
Mr. Erixon, one thing that the EU has to do to be a better partner to the US.
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, I think it's important to say that when we talk about competitiveness, it doesn't really mean having states that are trying to be more competitive vis-a-vis partner countries. What we're talking about is economic performance. It's the dynamism of companies, the dynamism of the market, and the ability they have in order to generate sound competitive behavior. Because even if we have strong political partnerships, we do want to have companies that compete very hard ways with each other, because that's going to lead to more dynamism, more prosperity, more technological change. So it's important that we fit the different pieces together in the right way here, that we don't want to have a competitiveness policies where we as Europe or individual European countries seek to sort of develop policies that are going to disadvantage other countries just because we think that's going to be advantageous for us. So it's more about trying to find sort of these economic policies that will make the market more competitive. Now, coming back to the point on investment, I mean, I think this is absolutely crucial. So let me just give you one stat here on AI. Global equity investments in artificial intelligence. It's roughly, America represents 40% of all global equity investments. China represents roughly 40% of all global equity investments. Europe represents 7% of all global equity investments in AI. So even if we are on par with America when it comes to the speed that we generate scientific papers on artificial intelligence, the speed we have similar problems as other parts of the world in being fast enough to graduate enough computer engineers and AI engineers to fill up all the positions that companies are demanding right now on engineering competence. So we have that, and we sort of could do sort of a lot better on it, of course, but the thing that really sticks out is that where we are underperforming in Europe is on the economic side of it, that we don't have the capital markets, the companies, the business environment that leads us to a position where sort of Europe becomes on equal par with other parts of the world when it comes to generating the type of investments that will be dominating the way companies form and the way companies compete with each other in the future in the field of AI. So, and here sort of, I think sort of building on also the points that Janka made, sort of here's the thing, which is that if you're behind other leading economies on the world when it comes to generate the investments, the equity into the economy within one particular field, you cannot catch up on that if you also want to be the economy that regulates AI faster and deeper and harder than all the other parts of the world. Look, I don't know what the optimal regulation of AI is. I don't think anyone knows it, but I do know that if Europe defines its own role of doing just that, regulating faster, deeper, and harder than America does, then I'm afraid it's just going to be impossible to have that catch up and make Europe to become the region which attracts a lot more equity investments into AI. And it's sort of finding the policies that makes the European economy more able to compete with American firms or with sort of Chinese firms or with firms from other parts of the world. That's what I would like to see. And I think that's what's going to be the essence of coming to a position where we can say we do have a strong economic performance within new technologies. And right now, Europe is not there.
Jaakko, and your one thing.
I have nothing to add. I absolutely agree with Fredrik and everybody else here on this point.
Okay. Maybe the last question comes from me. I haven't spoken about the artificial intelligence, but my question, maybe it's a little bit naive, maybe this is naive thinking, but it's a question about the artificial intelligence and the concept of good, virtuousness. So, seeing my 6 and 8 years old sons embracing this digital economy, being constantly online, I want them, to live in the better world and to get best of it, what's offered on the digital life and the digital economy. How can we avoid our imperfect world being subsumed into the AI, how can we avoid a copy-paste of our imperfect world in the artificial intelligence? A question naturally goes to Google.
Thank you. And I'm going to boringly repeat myself. I think if we put transatlantic shared values at the top of this thinking, I think we're going to get the best result. And I think it's clear today how other global players are looking at the topic of privacy that quickly stretches to AI. By the way, it's a huge revival of the privacy topic now with the AI emergence in the mainstream debate. So again, I don't want this to sound naive, but I truly believe that, for example, if you look at other major events in the past few years, like COVID, like unjustified Russia aggression against Ukraine, at the end of the day, it was the paradigm and it was a principled approach that gave us some answers that help us, walk through towards solutions. And I think at that point, that principle of transatlantic unity and shared values was on the winning side. And I think that's what we should apply to AI. And although, it doesn't sound very techy and it sounds very old-fashioned, like get Europe and Uncle Sam to work together, I think that should be really top of mind, and we should not underestimate this.
But it sounds optimistic, and thank you for you for that. And unfortunately, our time is over, and with this, I conclude our conversation on the transatlantic economic leadership in the 21st century. And thank you all who participated here in studio in Vilnius and who watch us online. I understand it be uploaded, so who missed it will have an opportunity to watch the conversation later. First of all, and of course, I would like to express gratitude to the panelists and to the organizers of this event, InfoBolt and the Center for European Perspective. Thank you, and goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you.